There are moments in life when everything quietly falls apart, not with noise or warning, just a slow unraveling that leaves you staring at the floor, wondering where your strength went. We are taught to chase success, to avoid failure, to hide our scars behind calm smiles. But what if failure is not the enemy? What if it is the beginning of healing, the first honest step of a deeper journey? This story is about that moment when holding on hurts more than letting go. It is about courage found in silence, discipline built from broken days, and purpose rediscovered after loss. In a small town where time moved gently, there lived a man who believed failure had ended him. He didn't yet know it was about to remake him. The man's name was Elias, though very few people ever said it out loud anymore, not because he was forgotten, but because he had learned how to disappear while still being present. He lived in a small town where mornings arrived gently, where the sun didn't rush the sky, and where people nodded politely without asking questions they didn't want answers to. From the outside, Elias looked fine. He woke up early. He kept his house clean. He showed up where he was expected. But inside him lived a quiet weight, something invisible, heavy, and constant. It was the kind of weight that didn't crush you all at once. It pressed slowly, day after day, until even breathing felt like effort. Once, Elias had believed in becoming something more. He had believed that discipline could shape a life. That effort always led somewhere meaningful. He used to wake up with intention, used to carry notebooks filled with plans, used to imagine a future that felt alive and close enough to touch. But that version of him belonged to a different season. Now, his days moved in repetition. Morning light through the same window, the same walk past the same trees, the same pauses where his mind drifted back to what had gone wrong. Failure followed him quietly, not as a memory he revisited, but as a presence that never left. He didn't talk about it. He didn't complain. He simply adjusted his expectations downward, telling himself this was maturity, acceptance, peace. But it wasn't peace. It was restraint. Elias had learned how to keep his emotions folded neatly inside, like letters never sent. He believed that strength meant silence, that courage meant enduring without asking for help. And so he carried his disappointment alone, convincing himself that letting go of dreams was the same as letting go of pain. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit in the dark and listen to the hum of the house. No music, no distractions. Just the quiet proof that time was still moving. In those moments, a question would surface. Soft, almost apologetic. Is this really all I am now? He never answered it, because answering would mean facing the truth he avoided, that his life wasn't broken. It was paused. And that the pause existed not because of failure itself, but because he had allowed fear to define what failure meant. Elias believed that if he stayed small, nothing could hurt him again. That if he stopped reaching, he would stop falling. It felt logical, safe. But safety, he would one day learn, can be its own kind of prison. And though he didn't know it yet, this quiet weight he carried, the heaviness he thought was permanent, was not the end of his journey. It was the beginning of a transformation that would demand something deeper than motivation. It would demand honesty and courage and the willingness to stop hiding from failure and finally walk toward it. Change didn't arrive dramatically for Elias. It never does. It began quietly, almost accidentally, on a morning that looked exactly like all the others. He woke before the sun, not because he had somewhere to be, but because sleep had grown thin and restless. The house was still, wrapped in that fragile silence before dawn. For a long moment he sat on the edge of his bed, hands resting on his knees, staring at the floor as if it might offer instructions. Then he stood up. It wasn't courage. It wasn't inspiration. It was something smaller. Discipline's quieter cousin. A decision without emotion. He made coffee. He stepped outside. He breathed in the cold air and felt his chest tighten, then loosen. That morning Elias walked farther than usual. At first it felt pointless. The old thoughts followed him anyway. The doubts, the quiet reminders of what he had lost. But his body moved, step after step, and something subtle happened. His mind had to keep up. The next day he did it again. Soon walking turned into routine. Routine turned into structure. Structure gave his days a shape they hadn't had in years. He began waking with intention, not hope exactly, but direction. He wrote again, not plans for a grand future, but simple lists. What to do today, what not to avoid. These small victories didn't feel heroic. No one applauded, no one noticed, but they mattered. For the first time since his failure, Elias felt momentum. Not forward, not upward, but alive. He remembered the version of himself who believed in effort, in discipline as a form of self-respect. He remembered how purpose wasn't something you waited for. It was something you practiced. Motivation followed, quietly, like a shadow catching up. He cleaned the parts of his life he had neglected, repaired what was broken, let go of what no longer fit. Each action whispered the same message. You are not done. Yet beneath the progress, something fragile trembled. Every step forward carried a memory of falling. Every small success came with an unspoken fear. What if this collapses too? Elias didn't say it aloud, but he felt it in his chest whenever things went well. A tightening. A warning. Discipline gave him control, but it also gave him something else. Attachment. He began tying his worth to improvement, his peace to progress, his identity to not failing again. And that was the quiet flaw. Elias believed becoming stronger meant becoming immune. That if he worked hard enough, stayed disciplined enough, he could outrun failure forever. He didn't realize he was still running from something, not toward understanding. Still, the rise felt real. His posture changed. His eyes carried less weight. For the first time in a long while, he imagined a future without immediately dismissing it. He told himself, this time will be different. And for a moment, it was. But life, patient and precise, was already preparing the next lesson. One that would test not his discipline, but his relationship with failure itself. Because the rise is never the story. What matters is what happens when it ends. The fall didn't announce itself. It arrived disguised as a normal day. Elias was standing in the middle of his kitchen when the call came. The coffee was still warm in his hand. The window was open. Birds were arguing over something trivial outside. For a brief moment, the world felt ordinary, steady enough to trust. Then the voice on the other end changed everything. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was careful. Too careful. The kind of voice people use when they're about to take something from you and don't know how to soften the loss. Elias listened without interrupting, his eyes fixed on nothing at all, as words passed through him without fully landing. When the call ended, the silence felt heavier than sound. He sat down slowly, as if the room had tilted. The cup slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. He just watched the coffee spread, dark and irreversible, soaking into the cracks. This was different from before. This wasn't the slow erosion of hope. This was collapse. Sudden, complete. The thing he had been building toward, the fragile structure of purpose and forward motion, was gone. Not because he had stopped trying, not because he had been careless, because life had decided otherwise. In the days that followed, Elias moved as if underwater. People spoke to him. He nodded. He answered when necessary. But inside, something had broken that discipline could not repair. The familiar ache of failure returned, sharper this time because it carried proof. "You were right to be afraid," it whispered. "This is what happens when you believe again." The routines that once grounded him now mocked him. Each walk reminded him of progress that no longer mattered. Each list felt useless. He found himself staring at blank pages, unable to write a single word without feeling foolish. This failure felt personal. It wasn't just about what he lost. It was about what it confirmed. That effort doesn't guarantee safety. That discipline doesn't make you untouchable. That becoming stronger doesn't mean becoming spared. Elias felt exposed, as if the world had seen his hope and quietly crushed it, just to remind him of his place. At night, sleep abandoned him. His thoughts circled the same questions again and again. What did I miss? What could I have done differently? Why does this keep happening? He replayed every decision, searching for a moment where he could have changed the outcome. But there was no clear mistake, just an ending. And endings, he was learning, are harder to accept when you've finally allowed yourself to begin. The weight returned, heavier than before. Not just disappointment, but shame. Shame for trying. Shame for believing that he could rise without consequence. He felt foolish for trusting progress, weak for feeling hurt. Elias didn't cry, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. The pain was too quiet, too deep for tears. It settled instead in his chest, where it pressed and pressed until even breathing felt like effort again. This was the moment everything broke. Not his life, not his future, but his belief that failure could be outrun. And as the days blurred together, Elias stood at the edge of a choice he didn't yet recognize. To learn from the fall, or to let it define him completely. He didn't choose yet. For now, he did what felt safest. He held on. Elias told himself he was coping. That was the word he used when people asked how he was doing. Coping. It sounded responsible, mature, acceptable. But coping for him meant refusing to let go. He kept everything exactly as it had been before the fall. The same routines, the same walks, the same carefully planned days that no longer led anywhere. He followed them rigidly, as if repetition could rewind time, as if discipline, applied hard enough, could undo what had already happened. In his mind, letting go felt dangerous. Letting go meant admitting that the effort hadn't been enough, that the discipline he had rebuilt his life around couldn't protect him. And worse, it meant admitting that the loss was real, final, unnegotiable. So Elias clung to the past. He replayed old conversations, searching for hidden meanings. He reread messages, studied details, imagined alternate outcomes where one small change saved everything. His mind became a courtroom where he was both the accused and the judge, endlessly prosecuting himself for crimes that had no clear evidence. Guilt crept in quietly. It told him he should have known better, that he should have prepared for this, that real strength would have prevented the collapse. And because Elias believed guilt was a form of responsibility, he carried it willingly, thinking it proved he cared. But guilt doesn't heal, it freezes. The more he clung, the less he moved. Days passed without shape. Motivation drained away, not because he didn't want to try, but because trying meant risking another loss. And Elias had decided that pain was something to be managed, not confronted. He stopped talking about the future altogether. Whenever the thought appeared, he shut it down gently but firmly, like a door he refused to open. Hope felt reckless now, dangerous, a luxury for people who hadn't been proven wrong by life. Inside him, something hardened. He mistook emotional numbness for control, calm for peace, stillness for acceptance. In truth, he was suspended, trapped between what had been and what might be, unable to step into either fully. At night he lay awake staring at the ceiling, his chest tight with unsaid words. He wanted answers. He wanted closure. He wanted meaning that justified the pain, and because none arrived, he created his own explanation. If I don't let go, I won't lose again. It felt logical, but logic can be a cage. The more Elias resisted change, the heavier everything became. Even simple tasks felt exhausting. His body moved, but without purpose. His mind stayed busy, but without clarity. He was not healing, he was preserving the wound. And somewhere beneath the obsession, beneath the guilt and control, there was a quieter truth he avoided. Holding on was hurting him more than the loss ever did, yet he wasn't ready to face that. Letting go to him still felt like surrender, like erasing the effort, like admitting that failure had won. So he tightened his grip on what was gone, unaware that in doing so he was slowly losing himself. And the deeper he sank into denial, the closer he moved toward a place even discipline couldn't reach. A place of silence. The silence didn't arrive all at once. It spread slowly, like fog creeping in from the edges of his life. At first, Elias simply stopped answering messages, not out of anger, out of fatigue. Conversations felt heavy. Words required explanations he didn't have the energy to give. It was easier to withdraw than to pretend he was okay. Days began to blur. Morning and night lost their meaning. He still woke early, still followed fragments of routine, but the intention behind them was gone. Discipline remained, stripped of hope, moving his body forward while his spirit stayed still. This was the quiet bottom. There was no dramatic breakdown, no tears on the floor, no moment where everything shattered loudly, just an emptiness so complete it felt almost peaceful, until he noticed how little he felt at all. Elias spent long hours sitting in the same chair by the window, watching light move across the room. He didn't think deeply. He didn't plan. He simply existed. The questions that once haunted him faded, replaced by something worse: indifference. Pain at least meant he cared. Now, even that was fading. He stopped expecting relief, stopped expecting understanding, stopped expecting anything from himself. The future became a concept without shape, and the past a room he no longer visited because there was nothing left to search for there. This was the place people rarely talk about. Not sadness, not anger, but absence. Elias felt hollow, like a house after the furniture has been removed. The structure remained, but nothing lived inside it. He wondered quietly if this was what acceptance felt like. If this was the peace everyone spoke about when they said, "Time heals." But time hadn't healed him. It had only made the weight familiar. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls in soft amber, Elias noticed something unsettling. He didn't feel afraid of staying like this forever. The thought didn't scare him, and that realization scared him more than anything else had. Because when you stop fearing stagnation, you stop believing in change. He closed his eyes and listened to the quiet. No hum of ambition, no ache of longing, just the slow rhythm of his own breathing. In that stillness, a fragile awareness emerged. Not a solution, not a plan, but a recognition. This cannot be the end. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't hope. It was simply a truth, spoken softly enough not to demand resistance. Something in him understood that the silence he had reached was as not punishment. It was space. A pause long enough for honesty to surface, if he was willing to listen. Elias didn't know what needed to change. He didn't know how to begin again. All he knew was that the life he was preserving was no longer a life at all. And in that awareness, small, trembling, and incomplete, the possibility of change quietly opened its eyes. Because the lowest point is not where you break, it's where you stop running. The encounter didn't feel important at first. That's how most turning points arrive. Unannounced, unremarkable, easy to dismiss. It was late afternoon when Elias found himself sitting on a bench near the edge of town, a place he rarely visited. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. He hadn't come with intention. His feet had simply carried him there, as if his body knew something his mind had not yet accepted. An old man sat at the far end of the bench, feeding small crumbs to the birds. He moved slowly, deliberately, as though time had learned to walk at his pace. When Elias sat down, the man didn't look at him. He didn't greet him. He simply continued what he was doing. For a long while, neither spoke. The silence felt different here. Not heavy, not empty, just present. Eventually, the old man broke a piece of bread in half and held it out toward Elias without turning his head. Elias hesitated, then accepted it. He crumbled the bread and watched the birds gather, fearless and ordinary. "They don't remember yesterday," the man said softly, "and they don't worry about tomorrow." Elias didn't reply. He wasn't sure what to say. After a moment, the man continued, "People think strength is about holding on. Most of the time, it's about knowing when to release." The words landed gently, but they landed. Elias felt something shift in his chest, not painfully, but unmistakably. He stared at the birds, their small movements full of purpose without strain. "I tried," Elias said quietly, surprising himself. It was the first time he had spoken about it aloud. "I really tried." The old man nodded. "Of course you did." No judgment, no correction, just recognition. "Failure doesn't erase effort," the man said, "but hiding from failure erases learning." Elias swallowed. The truth in it felt undeniable. The man finally turned and looked at him, eyes clear and steady. "You're not tired because you failed," he said. "You're tired because you're still fighting something that's already finished." The words stayed with Elias long after the birds had flown. They didn't offer a solution. They didn't promise relief. But they reframed everything he believed. Failure, for the first time, didn't feel like a verdict. It felt like a message he had refused to read. When Elias stood to leave, the old man smiled faintly. "Go gently," he said. "Beginnings don't need force, just honesty." Elias walked home slower than usual. His thoughts were quiet, not empty, but settled. He didn't feel healed. He didn't feel renewed, but he felt something else. Permission. Permission to stop proving. Permission to stop holding on. Permission to begin without certainty. The truth he encountered that day wasn't dramatic or loud. It didn't demand change. It simply offered a door and left the choice to him. And for the first time in a long while, Elias didn't look away. Elias didn't wake up transformed. There was no sudden clarity, no surge of motivation waiting for him in the morning light. What changed instead was quieter, almost invisible. He stopped fighting the weight. Rather than pushing himself forward with force, he began to move with permission. Some mornings he still walked. Other mornings he didn't. And for the first time, he didn't punish himself for it. Discipline, he realized, didn't have to be cruel to be effective. Healing began in small, ordinary choices. He cleaned one drawer instead of the whole house. He wrote one honest sentence instead of a plan. He allowed silence without interpreting it as failure. These acts felt insignificant, but they carried something new: acceptance. Elias stopped asking when he would be whole again. He started asking how he could be present today. The memory of loss didn't disappear. Failure didn't shrink or soften, but it changed shape. It became something he could hold without being cut by its edges, something he could look at without flinching. He noticed his breathing again, not as something to control, but as proof that life continued, even without answers. Each breath felt like a quiet agreement with existence. I am still here. Discipline returned, but differently this time. It wasn't driven by fear or urgency. It was rooted in care. Elias treated himself the way he once treated goals, with patience, attention, and respect. He ate better, not to fix himself, but to support himself. He slept when tired. He spoke when something mattered. He rested without guilt. This was rebirth in its truest form. Not becoming someone new, but becoming someone honest. There were days when the old instincts returned, days when he felt the urge to overwork, to prove, to outrun the memory of failure. But now he noticed the impulse before it took over. He paused. He chose differently. Humility replaced resistance. Elias accepted that letting go did not erase meaning. It revealed it. The effort he once mourned wasn't wasted. It had shaped him, taught him, prepared him for a strength that didn't depend on outcomes. He wasn't healed yet, but he was healing. And there was a difference. In the evenings, he returned to the bench near the edge of town. Sometimes the old man was there. Sometimes he wasn't. Elias didn't mind either way. The wisdom had already been given. What mattered now was practice. Each day became a quiet journey, not toward success or validation, but toward peace. And though the path ahead was still uncertain, Elias no longer demanded certainty to move forward. For the first time, he wasn't trying to escape failure. He was walking with it. Growth rarely announces itself with ease. Just when Elias began to feel steady, the past returned, not as memory, but as temptation. It started subtly, a familiar restlessness, a quiet urge to do more, faster, harder. The old voice resurfaced with practiced confidence. You're getting comfortable. Don't fall behind again. Elias recognized it. This was the ghost of who he used to be, the version of himself that believed worth was earned only through relentless effort. That peace had to be justified. That stillness was dangerous. Some days the voice was persuasive. He found himself stacking his schedule, filling empty hours with tasks that looked productive but felt hollow. He stayed up later than he should have. He skipped rest in favor of progress. The old rhythm returned, quick and familiar, and with it, the old tension. His chest tightened again. His thoughts raced. Sleep grew shallow. The calm he had nurtured began to fracture, not dramatically, but enough to notice. This time, Elias didn't ignore the signs. He stopped. He sat alone one evening, hands folded, breathing slow. The urge to push forward buzzed inside him, demanding obedience. But instead of acting on it, he listened. "What are you afraid of?" he asked himself. The answer came quietly. Being left behind, becoming irrelevant, wasting potential. These fears hadn't disappeared with healing. They had simply changed clothes. Growth hadn't erased them. It had invited them back for negotiation. Elias understood then that strength wasn't about defeating these fears. It was about choosing not to obey them. So he practiced consistency without intensity. He returned to his walks, but shorter. He worked, but stopped before exhaustion. He rested, even when it felt undeserved. Each decision felt small, but together they formed a boundary between who he was becoming and who he had been. The ghosts didn't vanish. They never do, but they grew quieter. Each time Elias chose balance over urgency, peace over proving, he reinforced something deeper than motivation. He built trust with himself. And trust, he learned, was the foundation of real strength. There were setbacks, days when he slipped, moments when he overreached. But now, failure no longer sent him spiraling. It simply informed him. Adjust, it said, not retreat. Elias began to see growth not as a straight line, but as a rhythm. Expansion and rest. Effort and release. Movement and stillness. He stopped measuring progress by output and started measuring it by alignment. And slowly, something remarkable happened. The ghosts lost their authority. They still appeared, but they no longer commanded. Elias could acknowledge them without surrendering to them. He could feel ambition without being consumed by it. This was strength, not loud, not rigid, but grounded. And with each quiet victory, Elias stepped closer to a version of himself that didn't fear the past, because it no longer controlled the future. Peace did not arrive as a finish line, it arrived as a way of walking. Elias noticed it one morning as he stepped outside just before sunrise. The air was cool, familiar, but something had shifted. His chest felt open, not light, just unburdened. He wasn't thinking about what he needed to become or what he might lose again. He was simply there, and for the first time, that was enough. The transformation hadn't erased his history. Failure still existed, etched into him like a scar that no longer ached. But it no longer demanded attention. It no longer defined the direction of his days. It had become a reference point, not a destination. Elias moved through life with a steadiness that surprised him. He worked with care, not urgency. He rested without guilt. He listened more than he spoke. When challenges appeared, he met them without panic. Not because he believed he would always succeed, but because he trusted himself to respond. Purpose revealed itself in quiet ways, not as a grand calling, but as alignment. The sense that his actions matched his values, that he wasn't betraying himself in the pursuit of approval or protection, that his energy flowed toward what mattered instead of away from what scared him. He found meaning in consistency, in showing up, in staying honest, in choosing peace again and again, even when chaos offered a louder voice. The world hadn't softened. Life still surprised him. Loss was still possible. Failure was still real, but none of it felt threatening in the same way anymore. Elias understood something fundamental now. Resilience wasn't built by avoiding pain. It was built by surviving it without abandoning yourself. One evening, as he passed the old bench near the edge of town, he noticed it was empty. The old man was gone. For a moment, Elias felt a flicker of longing, but it faded into gratitude. The encounter had done its work. The truth had taken root. Elias smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because he was at peace with imperfection. He no longer chased certainty. He welcomed presence. He no longer hid from failure. He walked with it. And in walking with it, he discovered something greater than success: freedom. And now the story turns gently toward you. Because Elias was never just one man in one small town. He was every person who tried, failed, and quietly wondered if that failure meant something about their worth. He was every listener who learned discipline but forgot kindness. Every soul who held on so tightly that healing had no space to enter. If this story leaves you with anything, let it be this understanding. Failure is not a verdict on who you are. It is feedback on what happened. Strength is not built by never falling. It is built by learning how to stand without hatred for yourself. Letting go is not weakness. It is wisdom, choosing peace over control. Discipline is powerful, but only when it serves your life, not when it replaces it. Consistency matters more than intensity. Presence matters more than perfection. You do not need to erase your past to move forward. You only need to stop living inside it. Healing does not ask you to rush. Purpose does not demand certainty. Rebirth begins the moment you stop hiding from what hurt you. If you are in the middle of your own silent bottom, know this: the quiet you're in is not empty. It is preparing you. If you are clinging to something that no longer exists, know this: letting go does not dishonor what you loved. It honors what you learned. And if you are walking forward, still afraid, still unsure, still carrying scars, know this most of all: you are not behind, you are becoming. So walk gently. Choose honesty over proving. Choose peace over fear. Choose to begin again, even if it's slow. And if this story helped you feel seen, helped you breathe a little easier, or reminded you that failure is not the end, stay with us. Like the story. Share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe for more quiet strength, healing journeys, and reminders that becoming takes time. Your journey is not over. It's just learning how to walk with peace.